February 3rd of 1959, Buddy Holly lost his life in a plane crash in Clear Lake, Iowa. That day would come to be known as the day the music died. Hi, everybody. I'm Big Al Weekley, and we're going to talk with Buddy Holly's best friend in the whole wide world. She went to high school with him. She knew all about Buddy, and she is the infamous Peggy Sue. Peggy Sue, it is just absolutely awesome to have you here with me to talk about Buddy Holly.
Thank you, Al. It's a thrill for me to be here.
You were around some of the greatest legends of our time in the 1950s. You have a website which is PeggySueOnline.com. The Peggy Sue. You wrote a book called Whatever Happened to Peggy Sue. Peggy, your website, PeggySueOnline.com, gives a fairly accurate account of a lot of the events that happened into the 1950s. Of course, we're going to get into Buddy Holly and some of your memoirs and whatever else may come about. I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the 1950s.
Okay.
Tell me about the 50s when a young girl is in high school. What was it like? What was a day for a young lady in the 1950s?
Well, I'll tell you what, it was sure a lot simpler than it is now when our children are going to school and high school. I guess I went into Lubbock High School when I was 15. I was a sophomore. We only had one high school in Lubbock, and everybody went to that high school. And I was absolutely scared to death. And in the very beginning of school, we had to take city buses, and they had different schedules lined up. And I had the mornings or the afternoon classes, so I got out later in the afternoon. Anyway, until the new high school got finished, we'd have to ride the bus to school, and then I'd have to ride it home. And you know, it was a time when we could leave our doors unlocked, and things were just simpler then. We had homemade bread, and come home and Mother'd have dinner ready, or where it would smell really good. And we had one car, and my grandfather lived with us. And it was just a lot simpler than it is now. It's become very complicated, I think, now.
I think it has, too. A lot of people know your business a lot more than they should. You have a 1956 Chevy, a red one, a beautiful car, on your official site. Where did that car come from?
Well, that is a friend owns that, and I did a photo layout, and he wanted the car in it. And so they shined it up and polished it up really nice, really pretty, isn't it?
Yes, it is. It's a beautiful car.
So he allowed for me to do a photo session with it.
And everybody can go to PeggySueOnline.com. We're talking with the Peggy Sue. You were good friends with Buddy Holly. You was married to one of the Crickets. At that time, Elvis Presley was coming on strong. And before we get into a little bit more intimate with Buddy Holly, can you give me an idea, and maybe you've never been asked this question, but there's something I noticed. Elvis Presley, when I look at a lot of his pictures at that time, he always played an acoustic guitar. But when I always looked at Buddy Holly's pictures, Buddy always had his electric guitar. And the difference between those two was Buddy, for a lack of term of better words, was Buddy more of a, like hard rock is now? You know, you have soft rock, and then you have hard rock. Was Buddy Holly a little bit more of a harder rocker than what Elvis Presley was? Is that the difference between those two?
Well, there's a couple of differences. Number one, Elvis Presley was not a songwriter. He never wrote his own music. Buddy wrote most of his music. He and Jerry Allison and Joe B. wrote, and Norman Petty wrote their music. And I think Buddy had a real ear for the new sound that was coming out. Now, when this was going on, I was in high school. Buddy was 4 years older than I. And Jerry Allison was 2 grades ahead of me, only a year older than I. But when they were playing the fair and those things that were around there, and they were watching Elvis Presley, I think in the beginning, his managers, because he was very good looking. We all can agree to that, I think.
Oh, yes.
And I think they had him picked for movies, and eventually, of course, that's what happened. But Buddy and all the music with Jerry Ellison and Joe B on bass, and Nicky Sullivan also. He played rhythm. They had managed to put a sound together that was more for learning to do rock and roll dancing. And I think that's the difference. Now, Elvis Presley was a great dancer, but his music was not as edgy.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the movies made him a little bit better. I think his dancing was more acceptable by the time they got him into movies. But I think that's the difference in it.
Well, I know in 1955, Buddy Holly was opening for Elvis Presley there in Lubbock. He also opened for Bill Haley in the Comets. How did you end up meeting Buddy? Is it true that he run into you?
Oh, yes. He had come back. I was a sophomore in high school at Lubbock High, and I had was going out to the band room, which they had all the musicians next to the auto mechanics. So anyway, when it was on my way out the door, and all of a sudden the door jerked open, and this young man bolted through the door with a guitar in one hand and an amp in the other, and just knocked me flat in the hallway. And he came over there and he looked at me and he said, I am so sorry, but he said, I just don't have time to pick you up. And he said, but you sure are pretty. And he just kept right on toward the stage. He had come back to play an assembly. And I did not know who it was. And there was a girl there that had watched this scene, and she said, do you know who that was? And I said, I haven't a clue. And she said, that was Buddy Holly. Well, I'd heard Buddy on the radio, but I had never met him. So I said, that's Buddy Holly? And she said, that's Buddy Holly. So I went on to the band room, straightened up my petticoats, and went on to the band room. My pride was hurt. That was the only thing that was hurt. So I felt like very foolish. And about a month or so later, Jerry Ellison, who played drums in the senior band, and I played alto saxophone, first-year alto saxophone. And Jerry Ellison said, would you like to go on a date with me? And I said, well, if my mother will let me. And she did, of course. And so Jerry came to get me for the date. And as I was getting in the car, I heard this wonderful laughter. He had a great laugh. And I kind of turned and looked over my shoulder, and there sat Buddy Holly with his date. And so Jerry got in the car, and he said, well, what is exactly so funny? And he said, I've already overwhelmed your Peggy Sue. And we all laughed, because it was a kind of an inside joke that we'd had together. So that's the beginning of our friendship.
We're talking with Peggy Sue. She is the namesake of 3 songs, and actually all of them are pretty famous, but one of them is probably one of the most classic rock and roll songs of all time, Peggy Sue. That was recorded and written and had some co-writers on it. We'll get into that here in a little bit from Buddy Holly. Okay. And then your book, Whatever Happened to Peggy Sue. Peggy, had you already began writing a personal diary before you met Buddy Holly? Was that just something that you naturally did or young girls did at that time?
Well, I think young girls just did it back in the 50s. We all had diaries, and it was just something that was going to stay with me my whole life. And I am so grateful I kept them because, I can pull any year out. I have volumes of them.
Really?
I can pull any year out and tell you where I was on that day.
Really?
And, yeah. And so when we decided, I have a partner that I work with, and when I decided to write this book, and she was a school teacher, and retired school teacher, and she said, get me those diaries out. And it just helped me put everything in the right time frame,
Right. Well, I know there's been some controversy about when you were working on this book, and I believe it was Buddy's wife, Maria. She threatened to sue you, didn't she?
Oh, she threatened. Mm-hmm.
But couldn't get it stopped, huh?
No, she couldn't do anything about it simply because, that's my name, an image that she has used in plays and her own projects that she has going on, and it's just an ongoing battle with her. So she doesn't hesitate to use my name and face and image, but it had nothing to do frankly, it really had nothing to do with Maria Elena other than the fact, maybe somewhat, maybe the beginning of their marriage, because I was pretty honest in the book. But I have the right to be me, and it seemed like no, she couldn't stop it. Those are my rights.
If everybody would like a copy of this book, they can go to PeggySueOnline.com. And Peggy, I'm sure you don't want to reveal a lot of information from that book because naturally you want people to buy it to read it. But is there something in there that maybe you could tell us that would give people an excitement, say, hey, maybe I better go buy that book and find out some of the truth? Because I see here on your website it says the secrets of their relationship and the truth about their spouses, and it will shock everyone who thinks they know Buddy Holly. Could you kind of give us a little insight on that?
Yes, I think I probably can. First of all, when Peggy Sue became a hit, the song Peggy Sue became a hit in 1957, everybody immediately, the fans that bought the records, just once they realized that Peggy Sue was a girl, I think they just assumed in their head that Peggy Sue was Buddy Holly's girlfriend and been going to stay with Jerry Ellison, the drummer. And so and Joe B., the bass player, and I were in the same grade in high school, same age and everything. So I think that's the first thing is that nobody explained. And you know, when they put out records back then, Al, they didn't bother to give any publicity to the writers,
right,
and what the song was about. But I just am very grateful for Peggy Sue to have been named Peggy Sue because of Buddy Holly. Because one of the things was, and I never will forget this, he said, I can't imagine anybody writing a song about a car and naming it Maybelline.
Or having having a movie called Christine about that old car that always come to life.
Yes. So he said, I wrote this song about a pretty girl, and so I always appreciated that.
Well, Peggy, I don't know. I guess I've listened to a lot of songs in my time. I've been in radio and watched many movies, but I believe that you're just about the only one living person that you've had 3 songs actually written about you and recorded, and they're all famous songs because we'll talk about those, but all 3 of them. And Peggy Sue, was released in September, I believe it was. Is that 1960 or 1957 is when Buddy Holly released that?
Well, it had sold 1 million records. I think it was released 11/11 of 57. And I had come home. I was in private school my senior year, and I had come home for Christmas and went to the airport with all Mr. and Ms. Ellison and Mr. and Ms. Holly and Ms. Malden and everybody, and to see them off to New York because December of 57 had sold exactly 1 million records.
Wow. I do want to mention that Rolling Stone magazine's 2004 list put Peggy Sue in the top 500 greatest songs of all time. It came in at 194. 1999, National Public Radio included Peggy Sue on its NPR 100 list of the most important American musical works of the 20th century, and the song was also inducted into the Grammy Hall of Fame in 1999, I believe. So Peggy Sue, certainly an iconic song in rock and roll. Is it true that they was going to call it Cindy Lou, or is that fiction? That's
fiction. And when I wrote the book, I went back over to Clovis because I'm over there quite a lot at the recording studio.
Mm-hmm.
And so Kenneth Broad and I, we looked everywhere. There was never a song that Buddy or Norman or Jerry, for that matter, or Joe B. ever wrote that they didn't have it written somewhere or have a demo made of it. Or, just they always kept track of it, obviously, because it was money, And we could find nothing with Cindy Lou on it. And the only thing that's a story that is in the Buddy Holly book by John Goldrose, and that comes from an interview with Jerry Ellison 17 years after the fact. So I don't really know where that comes from, but there was no Cindy Lou. Now, Maria Elena used Cindy Lou as in the movie, the Buddy Holly story with Gary Busey. She was part of that script, having something to do with that script, a big part of it. And right in the beginning of the movie, you see Cindy getting on the bus going away to college. Well, Buddy Holly had a girlfriend named Echo McGuire who went away to Church of Christ school, to college, and but instead of, who was a brunette, I might add, and probably 5'2", 5'3" in height. Well, what they did is they found a tall, long-legged blonde and put her in that part. Well, I'm the blonde with the long legs, not Echo, and so it's things like that. It's sarcasm. I'm sure every man out there knows what I'm talking about when women are sarcastic.
Yes, yes, I do understand.
Okay.
Let's go back a little bit here. You mentioned that movie. I bet everybody didn't really think that movie was actually going to revive the interest in Where is Peggy Sue? Did you have any trouble after everything had calmed down and Buddy was gone and you started leading a little bit more of a normal life? Were you able to walk down the street and nobody really bothered you, and then this movie come along and brought all this interest back? Is that true?
Well, that's true, and that's one thing the movie did. Good, bad, or indifferent, but that's what it did, because all of a sudden people started calling for interviews, and then the personal appearances started, and then festivals, and it just went from one thing to another. So yes, it did do that.
I want to mention we're talking with Peggy Sue. She is the original Peggy Sue. 3 songs have been written about her. Her book is Whatever Happened to Peggy Sue. You can go to PeggySueOnline.com. I'm going to be dreaming of that name, Peggy Sue, for the next couple of days, Peggy.
Well, I have to tell you something, too. I have to share something with you, Al. And that is, there's another song that was written last year, and it has been recorded, and it will be coming out, and it's I Still Love You, Peggy Sue, and it's a beautiful song.
Jerry Naylor?
Yes. Indeed.
I know about that. I was going to ask you, and has he already recorded that song then?
Uh-huh.
Okay. I believe, if I'm looking here correctly, and yes, I am on Peggy Sue's website, I Still Love Peggy Sue. That's on, you got a YouTube video of that, don't you?
I do. You can hit that and listen to it, but it's a gorgeous song.
I can't wait. I apologize. I didn't get a chance to listen to it, but we will here in just a little while. And I noticed that you also were on the Prairie Home Companion. Garrison Keillor, my goodness, he's one of the greatest ever.
He's wonderful.
Yes, he is.
I was so thrilled, and I was so excited. I was just like a teenager, Every time he looked at me, I wanted to giggle. But anyway, I had 2 wonderful days around just watching the men work. Always just magnificent. And Travis Hawley, of course, was on there with me, and that was Buddy's older brother.
A lot of information at PeggySueOnline.com. Hey, Peggy, I don't want to forget this. Tell me a little bit about the Buddy Holly Center.
Okay, well, the Buddy Holly Center had not, when I moved home to take care of my mother, I had recently had a divorce after 24 and a half years of marriage. But anyway, my mother needed me, and I moved home to Texas. When I got here, they didn't have anything in Lubbock that was anything, that had to do with Buddy Holly. We had a young mayor at that time named Wendy Sitton, and they managed, I guess at some point they had some money set aside, and we started having meetings, and I got involved with Lubbock Magazine to help get it open, and it just evolved. And I worked with Wendy Sitton and Connie that ran the museum, and anyway, Wendy Sitton managed to get the money together to get it finished. It was our railroad station in the very beginning when Lubbock first opened up, and so they remodeled it, and it's a lovely Buddy Holly Center. But there again, everything we do, we have to fight to get it done because of Maria Elena. But we got it open, and I'm really very proud of it. I'm glad that the fans have it to come and use it.
Well, I guess I'm going to ask this question. I don't know if anybody else has or not, but what is your opinion? Why do you think she is so against you or anybody else keeping Buddy Holly alive in his legacy?
I never have understood her. She was 5 years older than Buddy, and I explain that in my book. And she was from Puerto Rico. She came to, the best I can have researched her, she came to America when she was like 18, 19, something like that, maybe even 20. And her aunt was involved at Southern Music with Murray Deutsch, who ran Southern Music. And when she and Buddy decided to get married, the first time I met her is when she came to Lubbock for the wedding. And Maria Elena kind of has an attitude of being annoyed. Now, that's my impression of her only. Mm-hmm. And she didn't act very happy when she got to Lubbock. So, really? I don't really know what all her problem is.
I understand. I'm going to jump back, and you'll see this is where I'm probably a little bit different than in most, but this is crossing my mind at the time. I had the opportunity to talk with Owen Bradley's brother, Harold Bradley, and I was thinking about the contract with Decca that Buddy had got, and he went off to Nashville. Of course, he formed the band called the Crickets, and Owen Bradley was going to produce him, but I guess it didn't work out. Buddy going to Nashville to sing more of country music rather than rock and roll?
Well, I tell you what, they had written That'll Be the Day, and Jerry and Buddy had gone to see that John Wayne movie, The Searchers.
Yep.
And, he said, John Wayne all the way through it goes, That'll Be the Day. And so when they got out of the movie, they went over to J.I.'s house and wrote That'll Be the Day. And they had been rehearsing it. And they went, Buddy and Jerry, and I'm not sure who else went on that. There was a bass player by the name of Don Guess, and they went to Nashville because Buddy had a contract with Decca. Mm-hmm. And when they got there, Buddy was told that he wasn't going to do any of that rock and roll that was driving the teenagers crazy. That, wasn't going to be done that way. And so that was the worst That'll Be the Day I had ever in my life heard, and will go down in history as that. And when Buddy got through and he came home, he said, I think I'm going to just quit.
Really?
And somebody said, no, don't do that. There's a guy over in Clovis, New Mexico, which is just across the state line, and he's got a recording studio. And his name is Norman Petty. So Buddy, bless his little heart, and Jerry and Joe B. and Nikki went over to meet Norman Petty. And Norman listened to Buddy sing, and he said, let me produce a record with you. And I think it cost him $15 or something. And so they produced the record, That'll Be the Day, that went to number one for 16 weeks. But Buddy failed to tell Norman that he had signed this contract with Decca.
Oh.
And Decca was a sister to our brother, I don't know how we want to put that, to Carl and, what's the other one? Brunswick. And so Buddy said, well, when it came out and it started up the charts and there was so much excitement about it, they said, Norman, I got a little problem. And Norman said, really? What's the problem? And he said, well, I've cut that on Decca, That'll Be the Day, and I've called and they will not give it back to me. And I think in all of the Buddy Holly memorabilia, there's tapes where you can hear Buddy on the phone talking to him, to Decca. And Norman said, oh, and he said, and they won't give it back to me, and they won't, they're going to release it because this one has come out. And Norman thought about it for a little while, and Norman said, well, I tell you what, you're now not Buddy Holly. You're now going to be a group, so pick a name. And that's when they came up with the Crickets. And it was, in a sense, it's really kind of exciting in history because at that point it was the first rock and roll band that had ever been formed. Like later on came the Beatles, and they were a rock and roll band, but the Crickets were the first rock and roll band, 4 pieces, and they could completely duplicate their sound on stage. It sounded exactly like the record. So from that point on, the Crickets were born, and the Crickets put out "That'll Be the Day." So when you're looking through your history books and you see that, that's why.
What I was going to ask, the Crickets, how did he come up with that word? I mean, crickets are out there making noise. Were they out there one night and they heard the crickets and he just come up with it? Or did he ever tell you where he got that exact word from?
Well, he and Jay, I looked it up in the dictionary because they make music by rubbing their back legs together.
Uh-huh. I guess that pretty much answers that.
And so they thought, boy, that Crickets would be a good name for a rock and roll group, And oddly enough, when the Beatles came out, when they first joined together in England, they were called the Silver Beatles, which is a cricket.
Buddy Holly, let's just talk about him personally, and I've got something here I'll mention. Was Buddy young, energetic artist? You mentioned that he didn't tell Mr. Petty that, look, I've got a contract with Decca. He's probably like any other artist of today. Was he a businessman?
He was learning the business, and that was the whole thing. It was new. Rock and roll was new. We had the mafia or the underground, however you want to say that. The not so professionals in New York and also in Los Angeles. And, he's a 22-year-old kid, 21, 22. And so Norman did a lot of great things for Buddy Holly and the Crickets, and that was teaching him the business, trying to teach him. And Norman was learning, too, because, if you're going to have a recording studio, which Norman Petty had built, and you've got to have enough money to keep the lights on. So they were all learning what their place was. And that was a publishing company was part of it. The recording part of it was part of it. The personal appearances was part of it. And it just took a while to get all that together. But even in that, in 15 months' time, Buddy recorded like 130 songs, and most of those he wrote.
Were you in the studio when they were recording some of these songs for the first time? Were you there?
I was in New York. I met him in New York when they were on tour. They left on tour when we got back from our honeymoon. We had a double honeymoon, which is in the book. And our car broke down. We had a new Chevy. It just never did work. So anyway, I flew into New York and met them in New York. And I went to the Raining in My Heart, It Doesn't Matter Anymore sessions.
When Buddy got on the charts with Peggy Sue, your song, and the song that was written about you, and then That'll Be the Day, they were booked into New York's Apollo Theater. Now, how would the Apollo Theater think that they were a black band?
Well, because a very long, long time ago, there was a black group called the Crickets.
Oh, and he'd never seen any pictures.
No, I hadn't, and I'm sure when the booker looked at that, they just assumed that they were black. Rhythm, blues, rock and roll, and it was all kind of, because we were not rockabilly, we were rock and roll.
And then things started to really snowball and catapult when Buddy moved to New York and started working up in that area. Let's talk about this second song that he wrote, Peggy Sue Got Married. How did he find the tape? Was that in his apartment or somewhere that he had stashed it?
No, it was in his apartment, and he had the recorder that Norman had, that he bought from Norman, or he paid Norman for it or whatever, but he was sitting, there wasn't any furniture in the apartment, and I guess he was sitting on the floor playing the guitar and writing songs, and I think he was putting an album together. And Peggy Sue Got Married is one of the last 5-6 songs that he wrote. When we went to New York after we had lost Buddy to finish up things, Maria Elena asked me to spend one night with her, so I did, and she took me over. She said, "Would you like to see the apartment?" And I said, "Sure." So we went over to the brief part, and which I might add is across the street from Alan Freed's apartment. Mm-hmm. They were all right there together, and went into the empty apartment except for the recorder was there plugged in. And she said, "Do you want to listen to the last songs he wrote?" And I said, "Yeah, I'd love to." And she turned it on, and there it was.
Wow.
And so she didn't want the tape, and so she sent it to Ms. Holly here in Lubbock. She sent the recorder and the tape to Mrs. Holly, and Mrs. Holly tried to get them to get it, get it finished in proper order. And so she took it to Norman. Ms. Holly did. And she said, "Please fix this the way you and Buddy would have wanted it done, because the fans want it." And he did. He tried.
Here in a few moments, we'll, if you don't mind, get into the last days of Buddy Holly. I want to mention the third song that was written about you, "I Still Love You, Peggy Sue," that was written by Jerry Naylor. He took over as lead singer for the Crickets when Buddy was killed. Tell me about that song and why Jerry decided to carry on the tradition.
Well, I think last year when this song came into being and Jerry Naylor was putting a new album CD together, he was celebrating with rock and roll. And so Jerry was, we were very fortunate to be able to work with Jerry Naylor. He eventually had a heart attack, and that's one of the reasons that he quit working with us. But he is always, I was always really very proud of the fact that we worked with him, because he brought to the Crickets at that time, that became Jerry Ellison, Sonny Curtis, Glendy Harden, Joe B. when he was there, and Jerry Naylor. And so there was always usually four anyway. Glenn D. Harden might leave and go do something else, but he'd come occasionally and play with the Crickets. But they had a new sound, actually a new sound. And part of that, I think, came almost close to being surfing music, which was to be later on a huge hits coming out of L.A. And we were on Liberty Records label with Snuff Garrett was our producer, A&R man.
So they were experimenting, making new sounds, practicing, but unfortunately, because of the plane crash, with that somewhat kind of dampened everything. Of course, he was the man. He was the master of this all because of his voice and his sound and energy.
Right.
Obviously.
And his sound is so unique, and that's what Norman used to say. He's just such a unique artist that, it didn't matter if he was singing as the Crickets, you could hear Buddy Holly. And then, of course, Buddy Holly had his own recording contract shortly after that. But, yes, and Jerry Naylor brought a new sound to forming new Crickets. And we had one of our Crickets hits went to number 3 in England, not here in the United States, but in England it did.
Let's get into the last days of Buddy Holly. I was reading here, looking through some notes, and I've seen where you toured with the Crickets and went everywhere with them on their personal appearances after the plane crash with Buddy. But did Buddy Holly ever seem negative to you? Did he ever mention that, "Oh, wow, I just don't know if I'm going to make it all these years or not," before all this happened?
No, he never was negative. He had the most energy of anybody I've ever met in my life. He was either writing music or he was walking into a studio to lay down a demo of it, setting up a publishing company. And he had the day we got back from Acapulco, all of us, all four of us, he had gone over, he had an architect draw up the house he was building here in Lubbock with the studio. So he was going to keep the apartment in New York and fly back and forth, because he could take his masters and what have you into New York. Decca had already said, we'll help you finance building the studio. Of course, they wanted part of it, I'm sure, but that he had already done that, and he was very busy. Would he have continued making personal appearances? I think he would have done the fun ones, Yeah. But being on the road is not that fun.
Yeah. Unfortunately, it's not. We're talking with the original Peggy Sue. She has had 3 songs written about her. PeggySueOnline.com. You can get a lot of information, see some different photos of Peggy Sue. It's the official site of Peggy Sue, and she is in Texas. We've talked about Lubbock a lot, but I don't think we're going to give a complete location where you are. And also, go to her website and order her book, Whatever Happened to Peggy Sue. There you will find more true stories about some of the legends in rock and roll, such as Buddy Holly and many others. Did you ever get to meet Richie Valens and the Big Bopper?
I never met either one of them, but I tell you what, I did. Every time I went somewhere, everybody would ask me, "Do you know Donna?" You know, "Oh, Donna,
Yeah.
the big hit."
Yeah.
And I said, "Well, no, but you know what? I'll find her." And so, in fact, I was in Dallas doing something with TV, and I went home, and she's a mortgage broker in Sacramento, California. And I found her, and I called her, and I said, "Hey, are you Donna?" And she said, "Yeah." And I said, "Well, this is Peggy Sue. Do you do lunch?" And she said, "You bet." And we have been great friends ever since.
Wow, I bet that is so awesome to meet the Donna that you see about on TV.
Mm-hmm.
That is amazing.
It is so fun, and she's one of my most lovely friends. She and I drove down the same street going to work every day for years and didn't know it.
Really? Isn't that how life works?
Yes, it is a small world.
Yes, it is. I know that you were fairly close to Waylon Jennings. Kind of give me an idea of the day before the plane crash. I see that you have a list of what the itinerary was for Buddy Holly and the Crickets. I also see that you named it the Tour from Hell.
Yes, I did.
Tell me a little bit about what you know of the tour and some of the things that went on before the plane crash.
Well, first of all, I don't know who commissioned the buses that they had all the entertainers on. They were doing one-night stands through Clear Lake, Iowa, in the Midwest in the coldest time of the year, okay? And that's where all the old ballrooms, that's where everybody has ever performed. They performed at the old ballrooms. Mm-hmm. But they had grabbed all these record hits that were having hit records at that time and put them together. And so they wanted Buddy Holly and the Crickets, and so the Crickets were not there, and Buddy hired new Crickets and decided to go ahead and do the show. Now, the buses kept breaking down, on top of which the entertainers were not told, that they needed really heavy winter coats and stuff because of it. And they left out of New York, so that was the beginning of it. The accommodations were just terrible. Carl Bunch, the little drummer that Buddy had hired to be the Crickets, who he and I became very good friends, he had frostbitten feet from being on the bus. They even started a fire in the bus to try to keep warm. But the buses would go a few miles and break down, and go a few miles and break down. When they finally managed to get to Clear Lake to do Clear Lake, but he said, "I've had it. I'm going to rent a plane, and Waylon and Tommy will just fly in." By that time, they had to put Carl in the hospital. So anyway, what happened was when they found out that that Buddy was renting the plane, and at that time it wasn't for very much money to rent a plane, and that was from Dwyer rental service there. Richie Valens was not feeling well. I guess he had a cold or something, and I think that's what Donna told me. He flipped the coin with Tommy Alsop, and Tommy said, "Okay, you win." So he got to go instead of Tommy, and then the Big Bopper managed to talk Waylon out of the other seat.
So they took off, and of course the plane never reached its destination. There was some confusion, I believe, if I remember looking through some notes, that Waylon and Tommy were told that they could go to Lubbock to the funeral, but they couldn't because they had to complete the tour? Something to that effect?
They asked them to complete the tour, and they asked them to complete the tour. and then they didn't pay them after they finished the tour. That the guys didn't get paid. The money went to Marielena.
So what was the purpose? Was that the record company that was forcing them to finish the tour, or I'm surprised that they didn't just stop everything because of the day that rock and roll died.
Well, they didn't. That was I was sitting here. GAC is the one that put that together. They had different bookers in there that worked for GAC, and they didn't. They just kept it rolling. It was just awful.
Were the Crickets, the original Crickets that you knew, are they the ones that formed, well, more or less, I'm guessing here that Jerry Naylor came in. I see that they worked with Roger Miller in his 1960s tour. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, we did. The Crickets worked for that. The Crickets were his backup band, and we toured with Roger Miller. Yeah, great fun. Did the TV show. I always loved the King of the Road show. You're probably too young to remember that, but it was a good show, music show. Oh, I loved him. He was just super to be with.
Tell me a little bit about Roger, if you don't mind.
No, I don't. He was one of the funniest men. He had the funniest sense of humor, and you can hear that in his songwriting. And he could write a song about anything at any time. He was just, if he decided to do something, then he wanted everybody to do it. For a while there, we were using Frank Sinatra's airplane, the Learjet, going back and forth, and worked for Bill Hara, the casinos, which are just probably the best accommodations you can ever have in your life. Mm-hmm. But Roger, always nice, always funny, always good-natured, and his wife, Leah Miller, at the time. And they had a baby, Roger Dean Jr., and so it was really fun and exciting to be with them.
Peggy Sue, what do you think would have happened if Buddy Holly would have lived? Have you ever thought about what the future might have been for rock and roll, or how different it could have been, let's say right now, if Buddy would still be alive?
I think that we would have, if Buddy had lived and got to do everything he had already planned out, he would have, Lubbock, Texas would be the center of the record business.
Once again, we're talking with Peggy Sue. She is the original Peggy Sue. 3 songs written about her. PeggySueOnline.com. She has the book out that tells the secrets and the true accurate accounts of the life of Buddy Holly and the Crickets in the 1950s. The book is called Whatever Happened to Peggy Sue. And as we talked a little while ago, Peggy, it was the movie that actually brought the interest back to where is Peggy Sue. Let's talk about your personal life as being just who you are right now. You were remarried. I noticed that you helped your husband start a plumbing business. So
yes, I did. Mm-hmm.
Tell me a little bit about Peggy Sue right now. What's your interest and what are you doing?
Well, I moved home maybe 18 years ago to take care of my mother, and this was after my divorce in Sacramento, and I managed to help, luckily, get the street changed to Buddy Holly Avenue. Managed to work at the Lubbock Magazine, and I said, well, when Marlene Johnston approached me with that, I said, I'm not a writer. I've never written anything. And she said, oh, you're a writer. You just don't know it. So that's kind of where it started. And I learned to write articles, and then I learned to edit. And then you know how one thing just kind of goes into another. Anyway, my mother had a cotton farm that had to be taken care of, and I learned something about cotton and commodities, and, it's just the education never stops. I mean, because you're many things to many people. And I had never remarried. And my children, I had 2 children that I raised. I have a daughter and a son. I did not get the divorce until after my son had graduated from high school. So, my take on things.
It has been a great honor to talk to you and an enjoyment. I hope that we'll get a chance to sit back and visit again.
Al, if you need anything at all, just don't hesitate to call me. It's been great being with you on the show.